And yes, the hamburger we recognize originated in the US around the turn of the century, but a dish of meat between a couple slices of bread has been a part of many cultures throughout history. We're gonna focus on recreating one of the first versions of that sort of dish from around 200 BCE ancient China, Roujiamo, which literally translates to meat in mo, which is a type of Chinese bread. So let's try it out. So the first thing we're gonna do is get our pork belly braising, because it's gonna take a little bit of time for it to get nice and tender and fall apart. We want the pork skin on there because it's going to give us a lot of gelatin, so we have a nice unctuous braise. So the first thing I'm going to do is crush up some rock sugar. We're going to start this braise by caramelizing the rock sugar in a little bit of oil before we add everything else to the pot. So I'm going to do a little smish smash. We don't need this to be a totally fine powder. We're just breaking it up so it melts a little bit more evenly for us. Okay, that feels good. And now I'm gonna heat up a little bit of oil before I add that sugar, and we're gonna cook it into a nice dark caramel. Now already this is really different from the hamburger you or I might recognize because we're using braised pork belly instead of ground beef, but it's the past. This is how they did it. Meat and bread. Okay, rock sugar's going in. And I'm just gonna do this over medium-high heat while stirring. We want the rock sugar to melt and caramelize. In the oil, it's not gonna totally mix, but don't freak out. It's gonna kind of look a little clumpy, but that's fine. We're just looking to develop some nice color at this point. So we're gonna season this with a bunch of spices, aromatics, but the proper Roujiamo establishments, they actually have a heritage broth that's been simmering for 50, 60, sometimes even 70 years. They'll refresh and reseason it, but it's essentially the same pot that simmers away for over half a century. Keep this moving around so we can evenly caramelize it. Keep an eye on it because after it melts, it goes pretty quickly. And we just keep stirring. Oh, that's the cutting board burning just a little bit, just slightly. There we go. It's gonna add a nice smoky aroma. Just the scent of, it's like a smoked cutting board braised pork. If you have the bone on your pork belly, I would throw that in here too. It's gonna add a lot of nice flavor to the broth. If you just got boneless, that's good too. Try and get bone in, skin on, whatever you got, because that's how they would have done it before. It adds a lot of collagen, a lot of flavor. Now you can see it's kind of starting to smoke. That's how you know we're getting to the caramel stage. We're so close. It's melting, but it's still in clumps. It's not gonna fully dissolve in the oil, and that's okay. This is a really typical way that a lot of Chinese braises are started, with this dark caramel. It adds a lot of depth. Ooh, and we're getting there. This is amber. And I'm gonna have my water ready to deglaze because it's gonna go pretty fast. Smoky, sizzly, and now it's time. Step back when you add the water because it's gonna splatter. Wasn't that exciting? Okay, and now all that's in there is the water, the sugar, and the oil, but because we took the time to caramelize that rock sugar, it already has a really nice color to it. And now everything just goes into the pot. I'm gonna add our pork belly. And we're gonna add a little bit of sherry here because it's what's easy to find, but traditionally there would be a Chinese wine in here. You can use a modern Chinese wine like Liaozhu, but they wouldn't have something exactly like that, but Chinese wine does date back as far as 2000 BCE. And here I've got a little bit of ginger. They might have also used galangal, which is pretty similar to ginger, but it has a little bit more floral aroma and it's not as punchy, it's not as spicy. Now here I've got some Szechuan peppercorns. Szechuan peppercorns taste really unique. They're not spicy. It's more of a sensation than a flavor. Kind of has this numbing, tingling effect, and it's really nice to incorporate in dishes that are spicy because it almost cools you down, a little bit of a menthol kind of situation. We're gonna add a little bit of star anise for that, licoricey flavor, and we're gonna bump up the licorice flavor with a few slices of licorice root. Now, licorice root also has a history of its own. King Tut was buried with it in his tomb in 1350 BC. And Chinese ruler Shennong thought it had magical rejuvenating powers back in 2300 BCE. Okay, add a few cloves, a little bit of cinnamon, and here I have some shanza. This is actually a berry, so it's gonna add some nice sour tart flavors, brighten the whole thing up. They're gonna kind of plump in the cooking liquid as well. And now I'm gonna add a little bit of fermented soybean paste. You could also use soy sauce. Back then they wouldn't have had soy sauce. They didn't even have soybean paste. That came a few centuries later, but they would have probably used something like fermented soybeans. All in the pot. Everybody's joining the party. We're gonna add the salt at the end because this fermented paste does have some salt. So it'll be easier for us to adjust the seasoning at the end. So getting all of it, scraping it in there. And we're gonna just let this come to a simmer, and this is gonna slowly braise for about 3 hours. We wanna make sure it gets totally tender, completely fall apart. And in the meantime, we're gonna go make our mo bread. So this bread is pretty simple. It's gonna be all-purpose flour, yeast, salt, and oil. The thing about it that's unique is the way that it's formed into these coiled buns. It's almost like laminated a little bit, but comes together pretty easily. I've got my all-purpose flour. And I'm gonna add some salt and yeast and whisk it up with my finger whisk. You know, the finger whisk is making a lot of appearances in this show. Now, in the modern day, mo breads often have a little baking powder, baking soda, but they wouldn't have had that back then. So we're gonna give it a go, OG style. None of that extra powder stuff. So I just like to start by whisking up my dry, and then we're gonna pour our water and oil right into the middle and start kneading. So here we go. This is just a little bit of room temperature water, a little bit of oil, and then I'm gonna return to the finger whisk. First, we're just kind of moistening everything, bringing it all together, and then we're gonna get in and knead. At this point, when I'm like bringing it together, I'm gonna see sometimes you need add a little bit more water, sometimes you need to add a little bit more flour. You gotta feel it as you go. The goal here is we want a really nice, soft, supple dough. This is called shaggy mass. You can see everything. We're getting everything wet, but it's not really come together. This is a stage you'll see in a lot of recipe writing, shaggy mass. That's what it looks like. It's shaggy. I suppose it's a mass. And I think I need a little splash of water. A little bit more. It's feeling a little dry. So I like to go just like a tablespoon at a time. Don't get too crazy because then you gotta add more flour. We're just gonna be going back and forth. So this dish, Roujiamo, it actually originated in Xi'an, which is one of China's oldest cities. It's famous for their terracotta army that was erected to protect this tomb of their first emperor who died in 210 BCE, which is actually when this dish also originated. So you can, hang out with the terracotta army, eat some Roujiamo, a little bit more water. We want this to be nice and supple and soft. Chinese bao buns, it's a pretty similar dough, but those buns are steamed. They're also filled with meat, so it's kind of like the burger situation. You got some meat in some bread, but it's a much newer dish than this one. We wanted to go back. We wanted to go back as far as we could. That's why we're making this. Okay, I think I'm feeling good about my hydration. Now we just knead. And I think I'm gonna need a little height. Now I'm gonna really get in there. So it looks really rough right now, but it's gonna come together. It's gonna get nice and smooth. You just gotta keep going. Just take some time. Since we're using a white flour here instead of like a whole grain, we're gonna end up with a really fluffy and tender bread. Now I'm gonna divide it into 10 portions, and we're going to start forming our mo bread. So you wanna deflate just a little. That's to help distribute the gases that have developed during this first fermentation. It's gonna take a minute to proof this, so it's going to keep growing, keep poofing. I like to roll it up, really make sure. Not only does this really make sure that we deflate the dough, distribute the gases, but it's gonna make it easier to portion. All right. So I find it easier to make a nice big long log. Try and make it even. They wouldn't be portioning with a scale, so this is about using your eye, making it look even. We want nice, pretty, even mo buns, but also they're gonna cook evenly that way. Okay, so we'll cut this in half. Are you half? Yes. Then we're gonna cut each portion into 5. 5's a hard number to nail. Let's see, 3. Wait, a little bit more. We're gonna nail it. These are gonna be such consistent portions. Man, we're not gonna know what's going on. Okay, so let's cut this up. If you had a scale, you could be really precise, but you know, you just wanna get close, you wanna get there. Now I'm gonna keep the rest of my dough covered while I work with one piece at a time, because we don't want it to dry out. It proofed really nicely and it's looking really good. Actually, I'm gonna do 2. I can do this with 2 hands. Yeah, we're gonna lightly form these into balls before we make coils. So we don't have to be crazy perfect at this point because we're not gonna make rolls. This is just to make sure that when we go on with the next stage of forming, it'll be nice and even. So just a gentle roll on the board to kind of roughly make balls. We're gonna do that with all of them. If I was making like a dinner roll and I was gonna keep it in this shape, I would keep going until it was perfectly smooth. We don't need that right now. So just quick spin on the board to get it nice and evenly balled. But this is a move that I've noticed a lot of like new bakers, if you haven't used a lot of dough, it can be kind of hard. The key is don't push down too much. You're not squishing it. If you squish it, that's gonna happen. We're just like rolling it against the board, like you're playing with Play-Doh, but you're doing it with the board, so you can do two hands at a time. If you're new to this, you can start with one hand, or even 2 hands on one ball. And I'm kind of just scooching it around the board with my palm, but we don't need it to be too perfect right now. So I'm gonna give it a quick circle. Okay, now, the forming. Now I've actually never made this dough before, so I'm really interested. It kind of comes out looking a little bit laminated, kind of like when you're making a scallion pancake. We're gonna get some layers in there. So we start by making this into a snake. We're gonna just keep rolling. You wanna try and keep it even, smooth. If you've got seams like that, just give them a pinch and then they'll roll together. And this is gonna help us create a little pocket when we split it open, like a pita pocket. This is fun. The dough got really nice and smooth and supple from resting. Not only does it ferment when you give it that time to hang out, but the glutens are gonna relax, so it's a little bit easier to like manipulate it and handle it and do what you need to do. So we have our snake. Now we're gonna roll it flat. This is a really fun dough to make. So like this, we're gonna go flat. We wanna go kind of thin here because that's what's gonna give us those nice layers. But it doesn't have to be perfect because we're only in like step 2 of the forming. And okay, I feel good with that. Now, we're gonna smear a little oil down the middle. This is gonna keep this little pocket happening in the middle, so when we split it, it's just gonna like easily open up for us, just like a pita. Little smoosh, nothing crazy. We're gonna fold this over hot dog style. I mean, this is a really fun bread to make. Fold this over and we're gonna coil it up like a cinnamon bun, like one cinnamon bun, okay? Now, I'm just gonna gently flatten this. Now, we're gonna use a rolling pin to roll it in a way where we're gonna roll just the edges because the goal is for it to end up kind of like a bowl shape. This is a little tricky and I haven't done it before, so I'm gonna try my best. But our goal is for this to ultimately be just under 1 centimeter thick. So we're gonna use the end of the rolling pin and turn as I roll, and hopefully we end up with a kind of a cup shape. I don't know, honestly. It's my first time doing this thing, so we're figuring it out together. Now we're gonna bake our mo bread. They would traditionally bake this bread in a clay oven, which gets really, really hot. So to try and mimic that heat, we're gonna use a preheated cast iron skillet. So this guy has been in here getting nice and hot, but we need even more heat. So we're actually gonna turn the burner on. and give it a quick griddle on both sides over some intense heat. We want to develop a little bit of color. This is going to help it, poof, give us a little immediate lift. So I'm popping these on here. It's a lot like cooking a English muffin, but because this dough is a little bit more dense than an English muffin, we have to finish it in the oven. It needs a little bit more heat to cook through. We're going to just do this for 30 seconds on here until we get a nice light golden brown color. Flip, repeat, and then we're going back in our hot oven. This is a good way to mimic that like raging hot heat. Clay ovens get super, super, super hot, like 800, 900 degrees, a lot like a pizza oven. Your oven at home is never going to get more than 500, so giving it a start on cast iron is going to help us out a lot. Cast iron does a really good job at retaining heat. And look at that, we already have some nice golden brown color. So I'm going to flip these over, let them go for about 30 seconds on the other side. And then we're going to go right into that hot oven. I can already feel the side that was on the cast iron is feeling dry, crisp, and a little bit of fluff. And then once we split these open, it should be nice and fluffy on the inside. And because we put that little smudge of oil in the middle before folding it and coiling it up, we should, if everything goes right, it should kind of have a little bit of a pocket situation when we split it open and fill it up with meat. Oh, we have nice golden brown color on both sides. I'm gonna pop this in the oven now to finish cooking. This goes really quick. So, here we go. And we wait. Okay, so our pork is nice, wiggly, tender. We've got our meat, we've got our mo, and now we're gonna make our Roujiamo. Let's build it. So let me pull this pork belly out. The liquid has really nicely reduced, and it smells very good. I mean, this smelled pretty good immediately after putting those spices in there. Now, when I'm shredding meat, I like to go for like big, meaty bites. There's a lot of nice color. Even though we didn't give it a sear, that caramelized sugar cooked down and kind of like coated everything really nicely. So we got some good color there. I imagine this is going to have a really nice deep flavor from that long cook. I'm pretty impressed by how much color developed just over time on this pork belly. Because when we put it in there, we just dropped it in there. No sear, none of that, but it really darkened. And that's what happens with a braise. You can get some really nice color and develop a lot of good flavor. Okay, let me break this up a little bit more, and then we'll build one. Now, I don't want to let any of this braising liquid just go to waste, so I'm gonna sauce it up just a touch. A little bit of moisture.
Oh, yeah.
Now, the modern Roujiamo, the street vendors at this point would add the chopped peppers and cilantro. But the classic version, the ancient version, it would just be this meat inside of the bread. That's good. I like nice big hunks. Now let's check out our mo. Oh yeah, these are so cute. They came out really nice and fluffy, swirly. Hold on, I want the prettiest one. I like this one. They're all cute in their own way. But if you see, it got a little bit fluff after it baked. It kind of feels like a fancy, swirly English muffin. I'm gonna go ahead and slice this. Let's see if we got that pocket. This feels really nice and fluffy and tender. It smells good. It smells like yeasty and fermented. Now let's just pile up the meat. Get in there, okay. I'm gonna be kind of generous, right? Let's get crazy. That looks good already. I'm excited. It doesn't look like the hamburger I know, but I don't mind. I think I'm gonna do even more braising liquid because that fluffy bun can sop it up. A little bit here, a little bit here, why the hell not? Who needs mayo when you have fatty, porky braising liquid, right? Okay, so we got our Roujiamo, we got our mo, we got our meat. Here we go. Should we get in there? Let's do it. This looks really juicy and moist, and I think this is gonna be a messy bite, but let's go for it. this for my face? Okay. So it's a lot of it's what I expected. The bun is super fluffy and tender. The meat is really like succulent and fatty, but the flavor combo is like a new thing for me. I'm not familiar with a lot of these flavors, the star anise, the licorice, the shanza berries, but when you bring it all together, it's like really floral and aromatic. Even though it's like got that long cooked braised thing happening, there's this brightness from the florality of all of the aromatics we put in there. It's kind of surprising to me. I really do like the hint of sweetness. Whenever you have something really fatty like pork, a little bit of sweetness kind of really like, it really works. Almost every culture or region has their own version of barbecue because it kind of boils down to cooking something, usually meat over open fire. So today we're gonna make 2 types of barbecue from 2 cultures across the globe. We're gonna try and recreate the original Korean bulgogi, which is one of the oldest types of barbecue that you can still find today. And we are going to make Taino barbacoa using their traditional grill made of branches suspended over wood. That is also where you get the name barbecue, and it's the start of barbecuing becoming popular throughout Western civilization. All right, we are actually gonna be grilling and chilling outside. I'm super excited, but the key to having a good time when you're grilling is to do as much prep indoors as possible. So I'm gonna start by marinating the bulgogi. So the original version of bulgogi was actually called maekjak, and it comes to us from the Three Kingdoms period in Korean history. It was traditionally made with pork and usually just a simple marinade of garlic and soy sauce. But we're gonna use some other ingredients that were around in 700 AD. All right, I'm gonna start with some doenjang. This is a fermented soybean paste. It's currently very popular in Korean cuisine. It's very funky, salty. It has like a lot of savory umami situation. All right, so I'm also adding some garlic, ginger, and we're gonna sweeten it up with a little bit of fermented plum syrup. This is a really cool sweetener you can find pretty easily today as well, and you just make it by like packing plums with sugar, and then you let it hang out for like 3 months. It gets really funky, tart, and sweet. It's really fun to use. I'm also adding some soy sauce. They wouldn't have had soy sauce like this back then. It would be more likely that they used the runoff of a fermented soy paste called jiang. But around 700 AD, something similar to the soy sauce we use today was getting popular throughout China, Korea, and Japan. And then we're gonna add a little bit of toasted sesame oil, and we're gonna mix it up. So there's a lot of salt in here, a lot of acidity from those fermented things, a nice bit of sweetness, and you're gonna get some heat from the garlic and ginger, so it's like really nicely balanced. The sugar in here is gonna help the meat caramelize when we put it on the grill. The acidity and salt in here is gonna make sure that our beef gets like super nice and tender, but we're also slicing it really thin. It's gonna have a really nice tender texture, but also it gets some nice crunch from like the char. We're gonna get some good char outside. So my marinade is all mixed up. Now we slice the beef. Here I've got a ribeye. They wouldn't have had a cut exactly like this, but I've seen it made with ribeye pretty often these days. And we're gonna slice this as thinly as possible across the grain. So the first slices, you know, they're not gonna be the thickest, but as we keep going, it's gonna be awesome. I'm going for like as thin as my knife will allow. So that's somewhere between 1 millimeter and 2 millimeters. So my meat is really nicely chilled, and that helps. So this is gonna make sure that the marinade like really coats every bit of this meat. It's gonna be very flavorful, really well seasoned. We're only gonna marinate it for like 30 minutes while we prep our fish, but you could marinate it for a little bit longer. So you can see now that we've gotten past that tip, we're getting nice wider pieces that are gonna be easier to skewer. But because we are skewering it, those little bits are gonna be easy to turn on the grill too. So bulgogi actually has a really interesting history. It kind of like came and went throughout Korean history. It started out during the Three Kingdoms period in the form of this maekjak skewered pork dish. But then Buddhism got really popular, so people were eating less beef. And then there was a decline in bulgogi, but that's when banchan came around. That's my favorite part of Korean barbecue. Those are the little fermented vegetable sides that just keep getting refilled. And that's when banchan got popular. So banchan and bulgogi are almost like star-crossed lovers. They didn't start out at the same time, but they found each other later on. Because now you can't have bulgogi without all of the banchan. Okay, so now I'm gonna marinate my beef. I like to take a sec and make sure I get a little bit of smear on everybody, you know? By the mid-13th century, the Mongol Empire had taken over the Korean peninsula, and they love beef. So bulgogi was back. It came back in the form of seo ryamyuk, a brothy dish, as well as neo biryani, which is very similar to the bulgogi we know and love today. But back then, it was reserved for the royals. But then bulgogi had another decline. It's just ups and downs for poor bulgogi. Korea became a part of the Empire of Japan in between 1910 and 1945, and there was a beef shortage. So it fell away from popularity, and then it came back again, though. In the 90s, better and bigger than ever, bulgogi was back, and it became one of the most popular dishes in Korea. We're mostly coated. I'm gonna get in here, gentle toss to get those last few pieces of meat. It's like generously seasoned. So this is for my friends who like a lot of flavor. Everybody's covered, and now I'm gonna start skewering. Just grab a piece of meat, and then you wanna kind of thread it right on here. You don't wanna scrunch it up too much. You wanna make sure that the meat gets nice, access to the heat. We wanna develop some char, some color, so if you just scrunch it all on there, you're gonna have these little folds of meat in the middle that don't get any love. Kind of stretch it out when we get over here. See what I'm saying? So, wait, I'm gonna poke you in there. This doesn't have to be perfect. We have random little pieces of meat, so get it on however you can. Okay, for our version of barbacoa, we're gonna take a bunch of spices that are native to Puerto Rico that the Tainos people would have had access to and create a balanced blend for smearing on top of our fish before we cook it outside. So the first thing I'm gonna do is score and salt my fish. Whenever I'm cooking whole fish, I like to score it because it not only helps it cook more evenly, but it makes it easier to tell when it's done because you can just get in there and poke the flesh. I also feel like it makes it easier to serve because it can just pull the pieces of meat off. So I'm going right down to the spine. Don't be scared here. This is not a huge fish, so I'm just gonna do 2 on either side. Okay, now I'm gonna salt it right away. We're gonna make sure we get into those scores and get into the cavity. Salting it right away like this also it's almost gonna quickly dry brine a little bit while we prepare the blend of herbs and spices that are gonna go on top. And it's gonna make it stay juicy. Always get the inside. This is the tastiest part of the meat too, this belly bit. You can cut off the fins, but I like them for drama, you know? All right, now I'm gonna make kind of a paste to smush on top. I'm gonna start with some allspice berries. This is very common in Latin America and the Caribbean, and you can also find it a lot in the Middle East, often in grilled meat. So I feel like it's like the barbecue spice. It tastes like a combo of cinnamon, nutmeg, clove. Cinnamon, nutmeg, clove. I feel like one more. Black pepper. That's why it's allspice. It's all of the spice. I want to make it as fine a powder as possible, so I'm giving it some solo attention in here before I add the wet stuff. Okay. Now I'm going to tip this back into here and grind up our annatto. It smells so good already. We've only got a teaspoon. You don't need a whole lot. Okay, so here I have some annatto seeds. These are the seeds of the achiote plant. It's a lot like turmeric. The flavor is not super easy to describe, but you miss it if it's not there. But more importantly, it's used for it's very deep, rich, red, orange hue. It's originally from the Caribbean, but it is pretty much all over the world. It's used a lot in commercial production. It's what makes margarine a little bit yellow. We're just smashing it up. Should we kick you? You're doing great, though. Since these things have gotten a head start, I'm gonna put them back in here, and they're gonna get smashed up with everything else. So what else is going in here? Right here, I've got Mediterranean oregano, but what they would have used is oregano brujo, which is also called Cuban oregano. It has more of a minty vibe than Mediterranean oregano, but use whatever you've got. Now, culantro. So I know it sounds like cilantro. It actually tastes a little bit like cilantro, but it does not look like cilantro. It's definitely a different plant, but it has the same kind of grassy notes of cilantro, but it's a lot stronger. So you want to use less of it. And because it is stronger, it works better for like long cooking. You know, like normally when you're using regular cilantro, it's reserved for finishing stuff at the end because the flavor is so delicate and you lose it. It gets like muddy if you cook it for too long. Not this stuff. This is used a lot in the Caribbean, like the base for every goat curry is this green mixture with a whole bunch of cilantro, and it gets cooked down for hours, and the flavor really mellows out in a pleasant way. And now, the ají dulce. I think this might be the most important ingredient. Did you get good images of the most important ingredient? Okay, ají dulce, it looks a lot like a habanero, but surprise, it's totally sweet. It's just got all those like same floral, perfumey notes, but no heat. And now we smush. I feel like the theme of ancient recipes is smash. So I'm gonna add a big pinch of kosher salt, not just to season, but the coarseness is gonna help us smash. I'm gonna get it started, and then I'm gonna add a little bit of lard. The lard's just gonna help it stick, and like fat helps flavors, you know, develop, transfer, do their thing. Flavors love fat. Fat loves flavor. This already smells very good. It's that allspice. It smells like all of the spices. Okay, I've got my paste. Doesn't it look good? Now, our paste is just gonna get smeared inside out, both sides, in the cavity. Smush it on. It won't be perfect, but it's gonna be delicious. You know what? Before I get too committed to the sides, I'm gonna go inside. You got the, whole fish. Getting inside these scores. So the history of cooking on the bukan or the barbecue goes back a really long time, but we only have written information on it since colonization. After the Spanish arrived, this technique kind of spread all over Western civilization. Everybody was grilling, and it evolved into like the whole animal barbacoa that you see today, and that name comes from this. Okay, my meat and fish are ready to go. Let's get grilling and chilling. All right, here we are. We're outside. We're actually cooking on real fire. So I'm very excited. The New York studio has been completely transported. We got sand to feel like the beaches of Puerto Rico, native plants, just surrounded by this lush tropical forest. So I'm really excited. So this is the bukan. This is the traditional grill of the Taino people. We're using oak and maple right now, but traditionally the Taino people's favorite wood to cook on was guava wood that impart like a really nice smoky flavor. We're gonna get that same vibe with our oak. I'm gonna be cooking my snapper on here, and here is our hibachi grill for the bulgogi, and let's get cooking. Here's my snapper. I'm gonna put it in the middle where it's nice and hot. And I'm gonna just let this cook until one side chars a little bit, and then I'm gonna flip it over. So I know when they're ready to flip, when they release for me. That's how I know they've gotten enough color. We don't have to worry about doneness. The meat is so thin, it will be done. But we need to get good caramelization. Look at that. I love those little bits of char. That plum syrup we put in here is getting nice and caramelized. These need a little bit longer. This one looks pretty good to go. You know you're ready to go when you get color. So this one's nicely colored on both sides. I'm gonna pull this guy off. And let's see, how are you doing? Ooh, yeah, that's looking good. I'm gonna move this one over because it feels like this is the hot part of the grill. But I don't like to touch them too much because they are gonna stick until they're ready to not stick. You know what I mean? It's just like whenever you're cooking anything, it will release when it is ready to be flipped. Nothing's more exciting than sizzling beef. Gotta say, okay, good. Nice color, both sides. This is why you wanna not like too tightly pack your skewer so you get as much browning, caramelization as possible. That's where the flavor comes from. Ooh, is there a skewer for everyone here? No, some people are gonna have to share skewers. But you know what? Sharing is caring. I love the taste of the charcoal. You can really, really taste it in the meat. The charred bits are my favorite bits. I mean, this is perfect, delicious, wonderful. Everybody go make this. I don't know what else to say. It's just so, so freaking good. Okay, so for the snapper, I've got a few accoutrements. These are things that they would have had back then in Puerto Rico. So we've got some pineapple, some mamey, and some cassava bread, which I've never had before. So I'm really excited about this. It's really dry. It's like a cracker. And it's like a coarsely ground cassava flour, it seems like. Very crisp, very dense. This feels ancient. Biryani actually originated in Iran and came to the Indian subcontinent when the Mughal Empire invaded in the 1500s. The Mughals brought over Persian cooking prowess, along with foods like pilaf, biryani, and kebabs. From there, biryani mixed with native spices and ingredients and took off in popularity. The name for biryani comes from the Persian words biryan, which means fried before cooking, and birinji, which means rice. One really fun legend about biryani's origins says that Mumtaz Mahal, who inspired the Taj Mahal, was touring a barracks and saw how undernourished the Indian soldiers were. She ordered a meal of meat and rice to be made, and there you go, biryani. So like I mentioned, we're gonna try and make a version of what biryani would have been like when it first arrived in areas like modern-day India and Bangladesh in the 1500s. First up, I'm going to make the marinade. Boom. We've got our big pot for mixing things up. I'm gonna start with yogurt. So marinating meat in yogurt was something that was really common in the Mongol Empire, which eventually became the Mughal Empire. So they definitely would have brought this technique with them to the Indian subcontinent. So marinating in yogurt is gonna make our goat really nice and tender and juicy, and also it kind of gives you a little room for error in case, you know, you overcook it. I'm also gonna add some mint and coriander. So the Portuguese, when they first arrived in the 1500s, would have brought chilies with them, but it took a bit before the chilies were incorporated into the diet. So they wouldn't have had chili powder, but instead we're gonna go for some native spices, turmeric, cumin, and garam masala. Garam masala is a mix of spices. Garam masala just means like warm spices. So none of these are hot. These are like the warm ones, like cinnamon, nutmeg, clove, you know, like holiday vibes almost. Cumin's actually been in use for a long time. The first mention of it dates back over 5,000 years, where they would use it to mummify Egyptian pharaohs. And there's also a few mentions of it in the Bible. People like cumin. All right, salt going in. Salt, just like the yogurt, is going to help make it taste good and also tenderize, make sure that we keep it moist, give us a little room to groove if you overcook it a touch. Now this is ginger garlic paste, which is just a paste of ginger and garlic. You see this a lot in food from this area. You just like blend up your ginger and garlic way in advance, and then it's good to go. You've got it for when you need it. Now I'm gonna stir this all up together before I add our goat, and we're gonna evenly toss our goat in here and let it hang out. It's okay if you just like only have 30 minutes to let it marinate, but it's better if you can let it go overnight. Okay, now we're gonna add the goat. So we're using bone-in goat. Oh, let's lift. We're going with bone-in goat, and it's best with like a tougher cut, like leg or shoulder, because it's gonna cook a long time. And if you go for something lean, it's just gonna dry out. Now I'm gonna mix this all up. So garam masala, it literally means warm spices. And a lot of the old cookbooks, they don't actually specify the spices, they just say warm spices. So we made an educated guess about what it is exactly. In like the Ayurvedic traditions, it's said that those warm spices help warm you up. So it's like good to have when it's cold out. Okay, my rice is soaked. We're gonna drain it, and then we're going to parboil. Shall we drain? And now we're gonna parboil it. This is a really important step, and you see it in a lot of Persian rice dishes, which makes sense because that's where this comes from. So I have a lot of vigorously boiling water. Pros can they just know how much water and salt you need. But if you're a beginner, I think a good rule of thumb is for each cup of rice, 1 quart of water and a 1/4 cup of salt. So here I have 8 cups of rice, 8 quarts of water, and 2 cups of salt, which I know you're like, oh my God, that's a lot of salt. But This is the only opportunity for the rice to get seasoned. The majority of that salt is gonna be drained off, so you really gotta go for it. This dish is all about the rice. We need that rice to be flavorful. So I'm just gonna stir this to dissolve the salt, and then we're gonna add the rice all at once. Now, parboiling the rice means we're gonna cook it until it's almost all the way through. You're gonna bite into the grain and see a little bit of white at the core, and that's what you want, because it's gonna finish cooking in the pot. Cooking basmati rice like this is how you get it like really long and fluffy. I wanna get that vigorous bubbling back, and then we're gonna add all of the rice at once. And then it just sinks to the bottom of the pot. And you know that your rice is close because it all just comes bursting to the surface. You get in there, you taste, break a grain, see if you've got that little core of white, and we're good to go. Okay, let's go in here. All the rice at once. Whoops, whoops. It's a very large bowl. Could I have a GIF assist? Just with the bowl?
GIF assist.
See, I think biryani you need to make with a friend, because this isn't even a big batch, to be honest. This is like a half batch to some folks. I've seen batches that are 4 or 5 times bigger than this, so you really need a friend to help you with the draining and the dumping and the layering. Look at how much rice it is. It's crazy how much it swells, and it's not even fully cooked. Okay, I think we did it. It looks correct. I'm gonna take this to the sink, rinse it with some cool water, and then we're gonna go outside and cook over fire. I have to rinse it or we're gonna lose it. We're gonna lose the rice, guys. So our rice has been parboiled, our goat is nicely marinated, and we've got all of the pieces to now layer our biryani. Okay, so I've never done this over coals, so might be a disaster. We'll find out together, but this is how they would have done it. Biryani means fried, so we're gonna start off by frying some onions with some ghee. All right, I've got like a cauldron of ghee. It looks like a lot of ghee, but you really can't skimp on the ghee with biryani. This is like a luxurious dish. And then to this, I'm gonna add thinly sliced onion, and we're gonna cook this until it's lightly browned and then scoop it out. The onion's gonna flavor the ghee. It makes it very savory. And this is the beginning step for a lot of dishes from this region, from India and from Persia. Now, ghee itself has a very long history dating back to 2000 BCE. Ghee is pretty much butter that has the water cooked out and the milk solids removed. It's pretty similar to clarified butter, except you brown the solids. And what that does is give the ghee like these antioxidant properties so it doesn't go rancid as quickly. It started out in northern India, but then became really popular in southern India, which makes sense because it's hotter there. So butter probably went bad faster. And because we're removing those milk solids, it pretty much becomes an oil and we can fry in it. Biryani likely had precursor types of food dating back to ancient Persia. The Mughals conquered Persia under Genghis Khan in the Middle Ages and then went on to invade northern India in the 16th century. This is how the empire likely brought Persian food to the region. I have a little bit of golden browning happening. Not everything is brown, but that's okay because these are gonna continue cooking. So I'm gonna scoop them out of the pot now, and we're going to save this to put on top. This technique you see a lot. Like I can't think of a Bangladeshi dish that doesn't start with frizzling some onions. We're not caramelizing, we're frizzling. So it's still gonna have a little bite while the outside gets a little brown. Now, biryani is one of those foods that doesn't have like a, hey, here's the first version ever of it kind of situation. You know what I mean? There's actually a Tamil rice dish called onsuru that dates back to the 1st century. It has a lot of similar ingredients: meat, rice, turmeric, coriander, and it was fed to soldiers at the time. This fat is now super, super, super flavorful. I scooped out like half of it, and we're gonna pour that on top of the rice. Now in the rest of this fat, we're gonna add our spices. Here we've got a little bit of caraway, clove, cinnamon, bay. These are all spices that they would have definitely used at that time. Going in. It's gonna just get a really quick like little toast situation. You don't wanna go too long with bay because it gets acrid, so we're good right there. And now, the goat's going in. Okay, so remember how biryani is called fried? This is gonna get like fried a little bit in this fat. This is a really important step that you see in all cultures that have stews. So you see this in Bangladesh, in Persia, in Africa, in the Caribbean. And we're not like searing the meat, but we kind of are. We're searing the spices. It really helps develop a lot of flavor. In Bengali, it's called koshano. So here we have some more chopped mint and coriander like we had in the marinade. I'm gonna sprinkle half of this over the top of here. Boom, boom. And then the other half's going on later. Now we're gonna add our rice. Oh, that we spent so much care to making sure that it was cooked properly, par-cooked properly. So we're just gonna rain it down, one even layer. I like to kind of rake it in, so if there's any clumps, we can open them up so that we can get good steam action throughout and get that rice fully cooked. Saffron is actually legendary in antiquity. It's from this region, and it blooms for about a week a year. It must be hand harvested quickly or it can wilt, and there's only 3 stigmas per plant. So now I'm gonna add a little bit of salt, and this is just gonna help us grind it up. We wanna grind this up into kind of a powder. And then I'm going to add some water to bloom it, and we're gonna add this to our pot. We're already there. That's an easy smash. I'm gonna add a little bit of water to help this bloom. This is some of my rice cooking liquid that I saved. And it's just gonna help it bloom, pull out that color. It like immediately becomes so vibrant. Okay, let's proceed with our layering. Here we've got pot back on. Ooh, that's getting heavy. All right, now let's add the rest of our herbs. Bloop. Whoa, amazing, pretty. My mom does not believe in herbs in her biryani. She is also very anti-tomato. Some people put tomato in there. You know, everyone does their own thing, and everyone thinks everyone else is wrong. It's one of those things. Okay, here's that ghee that I pulled out of the pot earlier, and there's still some like charry onions on there, and that's cool. Just drizzling it on top. I'm gonna top it with these onions. They're gonna get super, super dark as they cook, and sometimes when you open up the pot, it almost looks blackened, but it actually, like for some reason, it doesn't taste burnt. I don't know why. It just tastes really sweet and savory and nutty. Just gonna try and distribute it. The fried onions were always my favorite part as a kid, so my mom, whenever she made them, she'd make extra, and I would just eat them plain. I'm gonna use the back of this wooden spoon to poke some holes in the rice, just so that the steam, you know, has some channels to flow upwards. Whoa, fun. Now I'm gonna add a little bit of that cooking water. So this is gonna create steam to cook our rice, keep the goat nice and moist. Cool. Now, the saffron. It's gonna get so pretty, like immediately. Now, stuff like knowing exactly how much water to add, that really depends on how big of a batch you're making and what your heat source is. So I'm totally guessing, and this could totally just burn or be too wet. I don't know, we're all gonna find out together. Now, extra little fun bit. So, before I top this off, we're gonna stick a live coal in there, So I've got this little cast iron skillet. I'm gonna nestle it in right on top, and I'm gonna put a light coal in there, and that's gonna create some smoke to give it a lot of flavor, but it also kind of vacuum seals the pot, almost like a pressure cooker. I've got my coal. We're gonna pop this in here. Now to get a little smoke happening, as soon as I add the ghee over the coal, it's gonna really start smoking, so I wanna get this lid on right away. Ghee. Whoops. And let's seal her up. This is gonna be hard because this pot is already hot. So this is just like flour and water. Standard like roti dough. Nothing fancy happening here. Ugh. And we use it to seal up this pot. Nowadays, I feel like a lot of people use Dutch ovens, which have like really nice and heavy lids, but with like an aluminum pot, you really do need to go for this dough situation. So this is called dum, and it's like pretty much this process of it steaming together. And I think dum means like breath, so it's like the breath of the biryani. So now there's nothing left to do but top it off with some coals, and we're gonna cross our fingers, cross our toes, pray to all of the biryani gods, and hope that when you open it up, it's okay. Okay, our biryani has cooked on and around the coals for 2 hours. We let it rest for about an hour, and now it's time to crack in. I'm like not sure what to expect. It smells good, so hopefully that means it is good inside. Let's plate it up. I need to get a little rice, I need to get a little goat, and then this bit, these little bits, these are my favorite bits. I know it's like extra crunchy and dark, but yeah, that's my favorite bit. I love it. Okay, where do I go from? Let's dig in right here. There's a little bit of blackening happening, but that's what I was kind of worried about. It's kind of hard to know how much coals to put under there, but look at the goat. It's really nice and tender. So even though I overcooked it a bit, it's still super tender and super moist, and that's the point of marinating your meat. It gives you a little room to groove, you know? If it gets a little bit over, it's still super, you can see it's like glistening. Yeah, that's tasty. The goat is really tender and moist. The most important part, the rice, is totally perfect. You can look right here. All of the grains are intact and like fluffy. Nothing broke, nothing got clubbed together. They're perfect and long. Each grain of basmati grew to its full potential, and that's what you want to see. So overall, I think this is like, for my first time cooking biryani outside over fire, I think my mom would be very proud. This was fun to try one of the first ever versions of biryani. I can't wait to go home and practice cooking this over coals. It was really fun for me, and it did add like a lot of nice smoky flavor. What US staple food has an interesting history that we can recreate here in the Ancient Recipes kitchen? And there is legit nothing that smells quite of the US of A like apple pie. Interesting enough, apple pie is not as American as we thought. The first ever written recipe of apple pie comes to us from 1390 England, from a famous medieval cookbook called the Forme de Cury. But, hold on, wait. The first ever US cookbook, American Cookery, from 1796, actually has not one, but 2 apple pie recipes in it. So yeah, I guess apple pie is pretty American. So today we're gonna make not only the first ever written recipe for apple pie, but also the first American recipe for apple pie in a kind of culinary revolutionary war reenactment, right? But instead of Washington and Cornwallis, we're gonna have Granny Smiths and Golden Deliciousness, right? We're having fun here. Okay, so I'm gonna start by making the crusts because they need a little bit of time to chill and relax. First off is the crust for the American apple pie, which is actually pretty similar to how I would make a crust now. We're gonna cut some butter into the flour, mixy mix, and then bring it all together with an egg white. The egg white's kind of the unique thing for me. When I make an apple pie today, I usually just use cold water, so I'm interested to see how the egg white works. So here I've got a couple of egg whites, and I'm just gonna beat them with a fork. It's always a good idea whenever you're cooking with an egg white, get in there and mix it up. I'm not trying to, get it frothy here, but it does take a minute to break up all the albumin, and it'll just make it easier to incorporate once we get it into the dough. See now how it's like easily pours? Because we broke up that albumin a bit. Okay, so now our butter. Chilled butter. I'm gonna slice it into thin pats and put it right into the flour. Really, the main difference here besides the egg white is I would normally put a little bit of salt and sugar in my pie crust. Oh, would you like me to cut this near you? We want to use cold butter because that's the key to getting a nice flaky crust. I do think it's interesting how this recipe's from 1796, but we're still making pie crust the same way. And that's like the coolest thing about these ancient recipes. A lot of stuff hasn't changed. For this recipe, we're using about 3/4 of the weight in flour and butter, which I think is a really good ratio. That's pretty much how I do my crusts now. So I have high hopes for this. I think this is going to be delicious. Nothing about this seems crazy so far. But yeah, I always put a little salt and sugar in my crust, not only for seasoning, but the sugar will help with the browning. But I'm interested, since we do have egg white in there, I think it's going to brown pretty well, just from the egg white. Okay, so little thin slices of our butter. And then I'm going to rub it into the flour with my fingers. Now, the key for flaky pie crust is always keep everything cold, and you gotta move pretty fast. Because once you get your hands in there, it's gonna wanna start melting. So I'm trying to move quickly here. Because we do have so much fat though, that will always make sure that you will, even if you mess everything up and your butter gets really soft and overworked, there will be some level of tenderness because we have a good bit of butter. Now we're getting these nice little flakes, like corn flaky bits. I feel like a lot of recipes tell you to go for pea size, which I find kind of misleading. I think corn flaky bits is much better because you want nice flat bits so you get a flaky dough. Interesting thing, the only apple that was native to America before Europeans settled was the crab apple. And it was the first settlers in Jamestown who brought seedlings and cuttings to plant apples here. But also, once the first apples were grown in America, they were mostly used for cider. People actually preferred to have their apple in beverage form than as a snack. I mean, I do like cider, so I get it. Okay, nicely incorporated. You see, it doesn't have to be totally even, but we are ready to go with our egg white. So I'm gonna kind of go with a little bit of a well method here. So it just says 1 to 2 egg whites, so I'm gonna just eyeball it. When it comes to stuff like this, it really does depend so much on your brand of flour and just like how humid is it outside. So you kind of have to eyeball your hydration. I'm gonna just add enough egg white to bring it together into a shaggy mass. Now, normally I use my hand fork for things, but here I've activated the actual fork because I don't want to get this too warm. I want to make sure my butter stays nice and cold so we get nice flaky dough. And then I'm just going to knead this to bring it together and roll it out. And then we're going to let it chill. Okay. I feel like I got nice moisture. I'm just going to gently knead, and I want to do it relatively quickly because we don't want our butter to melt, right? Normally when I make a pie crust, I always like kind of laminate it, you know? Fold it over itself a few times just to get nice flaky layers. This recipe doesn't have us doing that, but I feel like it's gonna be nice and crisp and flaky just because of all that butter and that egg white. This dough came together really nicely. Okay, I'm gonna roll it out. Some people like to rest their dough before rolling it out. I just rest it after, because you gotta rest it after no matter what, right? Why rest it twice? I don't know. Makes sense to me. So we're gonna roll it out and then let it rest. Okay, bring it together. Now, personally, whenever I'm working with something like this, I like go ham with the flour because the last thing you want is to spend so much time, make a beautiful dough, and then have it stick to your board. So sad. If there's too much flour, you can always dust it off later. I'm gonna go for about 1/8 of an inch. If you get too thick with your crust, it's going to be tough because a crust should not be that thick. I also find that rotating it after each roll will just ensure that you're not going to have any stickage. Okay, I got my little overhang. Now see, I don't worry about it being too pretty because I want it to be nice and flaky, so move fast. Don't let your butter get warm. And I'm just gonna go for like a little really, really simple crimp. Alrighty, so this is gonna chill, and now I'm gonna make the English pie crust, which is totally different. Chill. So next, I'm gonna make the English apple pie crust, which is totally different. Couldn't be more different. So you know how the last apple pie was all about keeping it tendy, working fast, cold butter. This is the opposite. This is going to be a hot water crust. It's meant to be sturdy and it's going to be freeform. So we've got AP flour and a little bit of bread flour because we want that gluten here. That gluten, baby. I'm going to add some salt and I'm just going to mix that up. Make sure it's evenly incorporated, and then we're going to add hot water and warm lard. Totally different vibe here. So this pie crust, this is going to be really sturdy. We're going to build it up and make it free form. And then the thing about this kind of dough is you have to work with it while it's warm. As soon as it cools down, it's very hard to mold. So we have to move pretty quickly. That's the one thing they both have in common. Move quickly. And this pie crust, I've only made a couple of times in my life. I am like a pro at the flaky stuff, but this will be entertaining for all of us, right? So in goes my lard. And then I'm gonna add some boiling hot water. And I'm gonna start by stirring it with a spoon just to distribute that heat a little before I get in with my hand. And we're gonna knead this until it is smooth. So through our research, there were actually a lot of recipes that said that Chaucer printed or wrote the first apple pie recipe, but that's actually not true at all. I know there's a little bit of an obsession over Chaucer and recreating aspects of his life, and he probably could have had an apple pie like this. It was around during that time. Okay, so now that everything's in there, after stirring it, it's like not super hot anymore, so I'm gonna knead it and get it nice and smooth, and then we can start forming, and we wanna make sure we form it while it's still a little bit warm. This dough also needs to chill a bit to get it really nice and stiff, so it doesn't like fall apart when we bake it, because it's not gonna be baked in a tin. Freeform. Actually, during this period, in the medieval time, they baked a lot of things in stuff called coffins. So it's like this hand-raised pie crust situation, and it wasn't always meant to be eaten. It's just what they served it in, these coffins. Okay. I think I'm gonna switch to a board knead. There is a lot of lard in here, so it's not gonna be like totally tough, but it's not gonna be flaky. Definitely not. And the crust here is gonna be a little bit thicker than our American crust because it's holding up all by itself. It doesn't have support from a pie tin. Okay, I feel good about that. Now, we're gonna make it into a ball and then a disc, and then we're gonna form our pie. So I'm gonna save about a third of this, and that's gonna be our lid. This pie is gonna be covered. The last one we kept uncovered. Let's see. Boom, boom. Does that feel like a third? Yeah. Okay, that's gonna hang out. That's my lid. Now, for this bit, let's start with a nice ball, and then we'll flatten it to a disc, and then we're gonna use these pie dollies to form the dough. Okay, I'm gonna form it right on the sheet tray, so I don't have to move it around after we form it. Now, these pie dollies are actually meant for individual pies, so you just form the dough right around here, and then you loosen it up. You can go wide and flat, high and tight, but we're gonna try and make a wide pie out of this. So I'm going for the last pie crust, I went for about 1/8 of an inch. Here, I'm going for more like 1/4. Whoops. It does release pretty easily because the dough is a little bit greasy from the lard. Okay, you're gonna go here, because I'm gonna spin the pan around. Make things easier for you, and sometimes that means you're gonna do things in a weird way. So I read online, if you don't have a pie dolly, you can also do this with a jam jar. You just need something with straight sides and a flat bottom. The dough is like super easy to work with, which I'm surprised. I thought it would be a little bit more difficult than it is. I feel like I'm good with my width, so now I'm gonna try and build these walls. Let's use you. And if they flop a little, that's cool, because I think I'm gonna be able to straighten it out once it's chilled. Hand-raised pie. So the top, I'm just gonna press it out to be a little bit wider than my crust, and then we will set this aside to chill as well. The reason why we have to do it now is that once the dough gets chilled, it's like really hard to work with. Just gonna go over with just to, kind of flatten it out a little bit. And then I'm gonna let this chill. I'm not really even worried about it sticking because it is very much covered in lard. It's very greasy. So I think we're gonna be okay. All right, filling. I just fell a little bit. All right, the crusts are ready to go. They're gonna be chilling, so let's move on to the filling. Chilling and filling. All right, we had to activate tall sola because this recipe requires a lot of mashing, and I'm gonna need a little bit of height to get in there. So all of these things, they're just gonna get smashed together and then go into my hot water crust that I just made earlier. This is for our English apple pie. We researched different types of medieval apples that might still be around today, but honestly, there aren't that many. So they're really just used for research purposes. we decided to go instead with a mixed bag from the market, you know? Here go my apples. Now, in addition to apples, in here, I'm going to add pears, figs, raisins. So it's very different from a modern apple pie. It's more of like a mixed fruit pie. And there's no sugar. There's no sugar in here because prior to colonization, sugar was really hard to come by and very expensive in England. So the sweetness is just coming from the fruit itself. So in here, apples, pears, figs, raisins. The recipe's a little bit vague and they just say spices. So we're going with the spices that were around in that time. So we got some cinnamon, nutmeg, ginger. I mean, that feels right. I would put that in a pie now. And now all we do is mash. So let's get in here. I feel like I want to take off my shoes and stomp in this. But we're going to keep it sanitary. Oh, okay. Okay, we're going to keep mashing this, pass it around the set, give everyone a good opportunity to get in a good smash. And then we're going to come back and put it into our chilled pie crust. All right, so our 2 pie crusts are chilling. We finished up the filling for the English pie, and now we're going to make the filling for our American pie, which it's actually going to be cooked before it goes in the pie. So I think that's pretty interesting. So here I've got a whole bunch of apples, skin on, seeds on, and we're going to stew this with just a bit of water until they get really nice and soft enough that we can mash it through a colander and get a really nice puree. It's going to be more like an applesauce going into the crust than a traditional kind of pie that you think of today. So I just have enough water to help steam and soften the apple, and I'm assuming that most of this water is going to evaporate. It's just going to help it get going, and let's get them in here. Whoops, we lost one. Okay, so I'm going to cover this and let it stew until it's totally, completely softened. I'm going to get in there every now and again, smush it around, and then we will come back once our apples are nice and tender. Okay, so our apples have been cooking for a while now. They're super tender, very, very soft, and ready for passing through the colander. They're pretty much like it's already applesauce here. Very, very broken apart. And I'm just going to pass it through here to get all the bits of skin, seed, stems, all of that. Now, normally when I make applesauce, I peel and core everything in advance. I wonder if there's an advantage to this. You know, like maybe the cooking it with the skins and the seeds will give it more flavor. But I'm excited to taste it and see, because I know that when you press grape must with the skins and the seeds, you get a very different flavor from when you make a grape juice and everything is removed in advance. So I feel like we're going to get some flavor action. Okay, so now I'm just going to do this, maybe just a couple scoops of apple at a time, and just press it through here so we get a really nice, soft, smooth puree. If I were doing this today, I would probably put it through a food mill. That's like this thing that's got a little crank. There's a screen at the bottom and it pushes things through. It's really great for making really smooth purees, potatoes, things like that. But this is how they did it in the olden days. Everything just took a little bit more time. So I feel like I've pressed out the majority of my apple pulp. I've just got the skins and seeds left behind here. And now I'm going to season it up with sugar, lemon zest, and rose water. And that's our filling for our American apple pie. I'm really interested to see how this bakes up, because it's just an applesauce and there's no eggs or anything binding it. I wonder if it's going to slice. I guess we'll find out. So the recipe says that we're going to season it with sugar to taste. So I'm going to start with the lemon zest, a little bit of rose water, and let's see, I'm going to start with that much sugar. I don't want to get crazy. I don't know exactly how sweet this is going to be, because they have cooked down for so long and the juices have concentrated, so I imagine there's already a lot of natural sugar in there. The rose water and apple smells really good. That is a combo that I'm a big fan of. Okay, let's get in here. I think that's pretty sweet. I'm actually going to stop there, Cooking on the apples really concentrated the natural sugars. It didn't need a whole lot. Tastes really good at this stage. The rosewater brings out all the natural aromas of the apple, and I do feel like I got more appliness because it cooked with the skins and the seeds, so I see the benefit of that. Okay, so now let me load up my American apple pie crust, and we're gonna have one pie ready to go. So here is my pie crust. It has chilled. It is ready to be filled. This pie crust has no top. In the cookbook American Cookery, the second recipe did have a top crust. So that one probably looks a little bit more like our modern apple pie. I am really interested to see how this bakes up because the filling is really loose and soft and it's pretty much just applesauce right now. So we got one ready to go. Should I move on to the second pie? So this is my crust for my English apple pie. I got my filling. I'm gonna load it up, put a lid on it, and this is also going to bake. Thomas Jefferson actually wrote about an apple that he said made unquestionably the best cider. It's the Tolliver apple. And unfortunately, it's been lost, but a lot of people think of it as like the holy grail of apples. They want to find it. Now, you know what I find really interesting? This is the English apple pie, but to me, it smells really familiar. It smells more like the classic American apple pie that I know because of the cinnamon and the nutmeg. Okay, cool. Now, I'm going to put the lid on it and then poke a couple holes so there's some like steam vents. Boom. The dough, now that it's chilled, is super, super sturdy. I feel like it's like indestructible. Now, interesting thing, during the medieval times, they did have forks, but they didn't eat with them. They just used it for prep and for cooking, and they mostly would eat with their hands. So I'm probably going to eat this with my hand, you know, to keep in with the tradition of the time. Okay, our lid is on. That was actually easier than I thought. And I'm just going to poke a couple of holes so it doesn't explode, you know? All right, so now that I have both of my apple pies filled, chilled, ready to go, they're gonna both bake, and then we're gonna taste. Okay, it is finally time. Our pies have baked. They've had a little bit of time to cool, and I'm gonna dig in. I'm going to start with the English pie first, you know, because it came around to us first. So let's get in there. I'm gonna eat this with my hands, because that's what they did. No forks, just digging right in. This is a very sturdy crust, nice and crisp. Crisp and crumbly, so. Ooh, okay. That held together really well. I wasn't expecting, I thought it might just all sploosh out, but definitely not. We got a nice, sturdy piece of pie. All right, let's get in there. I'm gonna just go in with my hands like they would have done back in the medieval times. I mean, it's really tasty. It doesn't taste that different from a pie from today. The crust, I was expecting it to be super hard and tough, but it's actually really crisp and it's a lot like a cookie more than a flaky pie crust, but it's not tough. It's very tender, crisp, crumbly. The only thing I would want a little more sweetness. Remember, this one had no sugar. It's just sweetened from those dried figs and raisins. The spicing on here tastes super familiar. The texture is really nice. I actually think this is really tasty and definitely worth trying it again.